StartupJuncture at the next web conference with Marvin Liao, partner at 500 Startup and mentor at many accelerators around the globe. Marvin, it's really amazing to have you here with us. Thank you.
Oh, it's my great honor to be here.
Marvin, to kick off this interview, you're a mentor at many accelerators around the globe. You just said that you lost the count.
I literally don't recall how many. I just try to be helpful.
Great. So I think you're in a unique position to tell us a bit more about the startup ecosystem in general around the globe, and maybe focus a bit on Europe, because it seems that there are a lot of things happening, especially the last 2 years.
For sure. I mean, I would say personally, as well as from a 500 Startups perspective, we're very interested in Europe. There's incredible sort of talent here in the region, and I also think, frankly speaking, at a macroeconomic perspective, they're all kind of like a lot of the economies are not in great shape, and so we firmly believe in sort of the startup ecosystems are going to be really, really valuable, to basically for jobs, for a lot of these unemployed youth, a lot of these unemployed, very talented youth, and on top of that, we talk about the trifecta, right? You talk about the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler. I mean, in a lot of parts of Europe, like you have a lot of hackers, like from a tech talent. There's a lot of great tech talent. I think there's also great design talent. Look at Amsterdam and sort of Netherlands, Scandinavia, France, Germany. Like there's great design talent. So we see a lot of the elements coming together. Okay, from a business talent and commercial perspective. Okay, in some cases, it's getting better, and that's probably the big missing piece, like sales and marketing. But those pieces are there compared to other places where a lot of parts of Eastern Europe, which I spend a lot of time in, there's incredible tech talent, but it's missing a lot of the hipster and the sort of hustler sort of piece. And so we're really, very, very interested and bullish about this region.
What's missing in the sales and marketing domain?
I mean, I'm originally from Canada, right? And I'm probably going to get expelled from Canada to say this, but Canadians suck at sales and marketing and telling their story, and that's something I think Americans do really, really well. I've spent 15 years now in Silicon Valley, and it's like, wow, you've learned they're just really good at this stuff. I mean, Americans are the most...
The point is that we are also missing this a bit in Europe.
I think it's a challenge, and I also think this this is, especially here, what I think is always interesting about this region, the Netherlands was originally a very entrepreneurial place, and this is still known for sort of entrepreneurs in a lot of other areas like fashion, and I'm just surprised at why Amsterdam is really underrepresented when it comes to startup ecosystems. It's changing, but compared to Berlin or London, it's still really behind. Or Stockholm.
And what do you think that needs to be changed in the Netherlands to get in the top positions of the countries in the startup ecosystem?
I think one part which is a challenge in new emerging ecosystems, sales and marketing talent's really helpful. I also think sort of having investors who understand how to invest at different levels at early stage and later stage here. People understand the tech business, and unfortunately that doesn't really happen until exits happen. But there's money here. There's definitely money here, and I think there's definitely a lot more interest in the space. So there's been a big change, I think, compared to when I was at Yahoo here 4.5 years ago. This is a very different scene compared to 4.5 years ago. So there's definitely been a lot of progress, right? But I think there's a long ways to go. Yeah.
Great. You talked about in a conference about the fact that, as we all know, that building startups is much easier than 10 to 15 years ago with Amazon Web Services and those kind of platforms that make it
much... and other things like the App Store. So your cost structure of starting a startup, when I was doing a startup back in 99, 2000, I was an early employee at a startup, we had to raise $35 million. Half of it was for infrastructure, and the other half was marketing, offline marketing.
But the thing that fascinated me the most about your point is that you said that it's also much more difficult, which I think you don't hear a lot about.
Yeah, it's still hard, because here's the thing now, it's so easy to do a startup now, is that there's a lot of competition. And so that's why the sales and marketing piece becomes like so important of differentiation, because like think about it, like I'll use a horrible example like Groupon, right? Like literally there was a Groupon clone within like half a year to a year in almost every single country, and there are multiple ones, like 10 or 20 of them in some places. And that's not a great example, but apps, right? It's easy to do an app now, and there's like tons and tons of apps in the App Store. And so sales and marketing, that thinking of getting distribution and scaling your business is much more expensive now, right? If you think about it, to stand out, you have to spend money to hire people.
Because of the competition.
Yeah, because of the competition, because it's so easy to start. It's also much harder to sort of stand out and to scale the business and make it really, really big. And so that's a big challenge.
You also talked about the fact that apparently not many startups are doing that right now, but focusing on the right problem to solve. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I think there's two parts of this, right? I think that number one, a lot of people are doing startups for the sake of doing startups, and I think one of the things I look for is really some level of authenticity. So it's like there's this term called like founder to market fit, and so it's just like, for me, it's just like, would you be doing this regardless of whether you raise money or not? Like, would you be doing this anyways? Like, what's your attachment to this problem you're trying to solve? Or you're just tinkering, this is a hobby that you just love, that you would do regardless, right? Like, and you would find some way to make it live. I think sometimes the best businesses start that way. You're just fascinated by this problem or fascinated by this thing that you just want to work on.
That's what you see in the market space.
That's what I think works. And I think too many people, here's my view, where I have a big problem about sort of like the MBA entrepreneur, where it's like, I think entrepreneur is sort of, it's half emotion and half with your brain, right? Just like, great, you can go and do this, work on this business and you love, and that's great. That doesn't mean it's going to be a great big business that's going to be VC fundable. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think the best businesses are kind of a combination of like, you want to do this, and then you sort of see that there's sort of some larger market as well too. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a combination of heart and heart and mind. And I think that you need to be sort of thoughtful about it, but also have to really want to do it. And so I see too many people with this MBA entrepreneurship where it's like, I see mobile's big and I see this other thing's big, I'm going to put it together in this big massive market. And you're like, well, wait a minute, are you personally interested in any of this stuff? Like, don't do it just because you think that there's a market there. Because this is so hard to do, you have to have an attachment to that problem. Does that make sense?
And that relates, of course, to the fact that you shouldn't build something because you can build it.
Yeah, it's just like, we should joke about that. We were chatting about this earlier. It's like, I remember back in like 99, 2000, it's like, just because you can do it on the internet doesn't mean you should do it on the internet, right?
The obvious question would be, of course, how do you decide you should do it?
I think there's great things now, like, for example, like the lean startup methodology, which didn't exist before, right? So now it's just about like, before you even build anything, like validate, talk to potential customers, and try to understand what problems are, and then build around those things. Don't just like build it and then sort of have it the build it and they will come mentality. That never works, right? Or very rarely works. I have never seen it work.
Okay, two more questions. One is related about the fact that you should really understand, and we're a bit diving into the topic, maybe as an advice for startup founders, understand the stage you're in. So could you tell us which stages you should focus on and what makes those stages different?
So I focus on early stage seed stage companies. So most of the companies I look at are companies that have a working product already, hopefully have some customers or some engagement or some initial revenue that sort of act as signals that something's working, and then our job is to go and see like, are those real signals, and how can we basically accelerate that, right? So if you have 10 customers, how can we help you get to 100 customers? I think like that's where we fit in. I think if you have an idea, we're like, great, there's a lot of people with ideas. Like, what are you doing right now to sort of validate it? And when you do have figured out, when you have sort of validated, that's when you sort of should talk to us. Does that make sense?
And when we talk about the phases, traction, transition, and growth, what would your advice be in that specific for those stages?
For traction, sorry, just clarify the question.
So the stages you were talking about is that there are 3 stages. There's a traction stage,
Yeah.
a transition stage, and the growth stage.
Yeah. So traction is sort of like, let's just say you have an app, and all of a sudden you're getting a lot of like virality and a lot of adoption, and the engagement levels are very, very good. And then for you, it's just try to figure out like, you need to do some initial sort of like testing to go and figure out like how you can actually build sort of like to figure out your unit economics, right? So unit economics, like how much does it cost me to sort of do this? What channels actually work for me that are cost effective for me? And then the growth phase, like, all right, I've kind of figured out, I've done enough tests sort of across these different channels, and I see this is working. Now I need to raise more money so I can basically sort of really pour fuel on the fire so I can, increase it dramatically. Does that make sense? And scale it.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it.
So my last question is about, which I really think is a very interesting point, but it's actually also at the same time truism in the sense that you should really make stuff that people want. And the question is, how do you decide that? Because there's, you of course have the lean startup idea, but you also have the Steve Jobs idea maybe that your customers don't know what they want. So how do you cope with that issue?
I think there's a middle ground, right? Like lean startup is basically, and you know what? Steve Jobs is actually a lot more customer focused than you would think, right? Like there's this truism. He's right. Like when you're building completely new things, like you use customers as a guiding post, but you also have to have your own ideas and bring your own ideas and perspective and experience to the table. So I think it's a combination of sort of asking the questions and understanding qualitative and quantitative sort of research to sort of balance it out. Then some level of building, right? And then sort of releasing it and sort of seeing where there's some divergence where it's like, wait a minute, customer said this, and this is how they're using it. Is that, did we build the wrong thing, right? And that's one question. Or did we interpret what they said wrong, or did they lie to us? And it's trying to triangulate all those data points. And then so it's this process of like interviewing, building, getting feedback, then building again. And that's what makes it so tough because like, as we said before, most companies never figure this out. And you also have to be very careful when you're doing the interviewing of not selling too hard. There is an art to sort of like, there's an art to sort of how you ask these questions.
Research bias.
Yeah, there's research bias. And there's a lot of times you're leading questions, right? Where, because you want to hear that answer. It's like, no,
exactly.
Like, I want to hear this stuff so I can build for, it reinforces what I'm thinking already. So you have to be really careful. And so this is really difficult.
Okay, Marvin, it was really great to have you with us. Thanks a lot.
Yes, my great honor. Thank you for having me.